My dear scholars, we are trying to learn how the Western management thought has developed over centuries. और उसकी reason ये है because business theories and the organization theories what we read today are basically have been developed in the West, which means Europe and North America. So that's why over a period of time we have reached at a point where the Roman Empire has become weak. Independent states are emerging in the form of new states. पिछली दफा हमने ये कहा था कि फ्रांस और जर्मनी, इंग्लैंड, स्पेन, these were the new states which were emerging as independent. And then we learned that on one hand, the role of the church was very important in the European society. On the other hand, the public governance and the public administration was actually being handled through the kings and the princes and the prince. तो इसका मतलब ये हुआ कि अब सोसाइटी के अंदर 3 किस्म के ग्रुप्स इंपॉर्टेंट हो गए. नंबर 1, kings and prince. Number 2, priests and monks and bishops of church. And number 3, those workers and peasants and farmers who are working on the farms. Of course, because it was agriculture era, 15th century, 16th century, 14th century, which is actually known as medieval period, and sometimes they call dark ages of Europe. तो ये 3 ग्रुप, कौन से 3? Number 1, kings and prince and knights who are actually staying in the palace, governing the citizens, have a governance structure. And the governance structure was being administered by the civil bureaucrats, and these civil bureaucrats were coming from where? From the church. Mostly, they were the religious scholars. They were the intelligent people. They were priests and bishops attached with different churches. In Germany, in France, in Great Britain, in Spain, and the other independent states of Europe. और तीसरा ग्रुप कौन सा था? वो लोग कि जो एग्रीकल्चर फॉर्म्स पर काम करते थे. इसका मतलब ये हुआ कि then what about the traders? And what about the merchants? Who was handling the business? In fact, business, the trade, and the merchant, and the knowledge which they learned from the Islamic era and from the Greek era. Remember the Greek era and the Islamic era? That knowledge, how the business and the markets and the consumer goods and the trade and the exchange will be done, that became less important. इस पॉइंट के ऊपर सोसाइटी में जब ये 3 ग्रुप इंपॉर्टेंट हो गए, and there was no place for merchants, of course trade has to go on. So the logic of the market was developing, and those who were involved with the trade, traders तो थे, लेकिन देखिए ना, इन 3 ग्रुप्स में से नहीं थे. तो चौथा ग्रुप जो इमर्ज हुआ वो जूस का था. They were the traders. They were the merchants. And it was assumed that these merchants and these traders, they only care about the profit for themselves. And they earn this profit through deceit and fraud. So in other words, this trading as a profession is actually a guilt of sin. That was the situation present at that point. बल्कि इससे एक स्टेप और आगे मैं जाऊं तो यूजरी एंड इंटरेस्ट, आज हम उसको इंटरेस्ट कहते हैं, but it's basically, in Islam, it's called usury. Usury and interest was prohibited and still is prohibited by the church. Yani, Christian religious thought, which was prominent at that time in France, Germany, UK. Interest was prohibited by Catholic Church. Remember, it was Catholic Church. It was the church whose the major and principal seat was in Rome, in Vatican City, and all the Christians living in France and Germany, they were following those principles. So usury and interest, since it was prohibited by the church, so those traders and merchants which were generally Jews, they were involved in trade, they were involved in money lending, and they were taking interest on money lending from the citizens of the society. And that's how in the medieval Europe, in France and Germany, the trade was being done. Of course, Christians were not involved, but these Jews, they themselves were not prohibiting from taking interest. It was not being followed by the Jews. So since the Christian religious thought was that interest is prohibited, so mostly the traders and the trading profession was not appreciated by the Christians. So Jews were traders, and it was thought that all these traders, those were generally Jews, they are practitioners of deceit and fraud. या यूं कह लीजिए कि डिसीट और फ्रॉड बिजनेस का, ट्रेड का, मर्चेंडाइजिंग की, एक्सचेंज का हिस्सा समझा जाता था. और वो इसलिए कि दोज ट्रेडर्स ऑफ द टाइम which was generally Jew, they were following it, they were taking interest on money lending, they were involved in high profit taking, and the deceit and the fraud practices, those practices which were not good for the society, they were being followed. And that was the state of affairs at that point, which is known as Dark Ages. Thank you.